For more on this ongoing story that we're following for you throughout the day, we're joined now by Christian Leuprecht. He's a security expert and professor of political science at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Christian, really good to see you. We haven't spoken in a long time.
Good morning, Natasha.
Christian, this story and the target around it keeps moving. But at one point, Donald Trump said the reason why he wanted to levy these tariffs against Canada and Mexico was because of this porous border that was allowing drugs and illegal migrants to come flooding through into the United States. So moving forward with that argument, can you give us a reality check, a proportion of how much drugs, how many people are actually crossing into the U.S. through the Canadian border?
Yeah, so there's a distal and a proximate cause, right? So the distal cause is the hollowing out of industrial production in North America. That goes back to free trade policies and offshoring to China. And that's really, I think, Trump's ultimate goal is to reshore some of that industrial capacity, both for economic reasons as well as for national security reasons. And Canada is getting swept up as sort of part of this broader strategy. But then there's also a more proximate cause, which is the concern that the U.S. has voiced, and not just the Trump administration, the Biden administration, Congress, the Northern Border Caucus, and the general approach that this country has taken in its relationship to the United States, all of which has been well known. Robert Lighthizer, for instance, the trade representative, in his book that details the NAFTA renegotiation, has laid this all out. So the Canadian government has had years to prepare for this eventuality, and it knew exactly what the concerns were by the U.S. administration. It chose to ignore those concerns for years. And so now we have to reap those. And yes, there is a concern about irregular migrants crossing, but that is down substantially from 20,000 interceptions in 2023 to about 4,000 last year. But yes, that is owing to Canadian visa policy, as Peter Navarro, for instance, has pointed out. And there is a concern about a disproportionate amount of precursor chemicals coming into Canada, which then result in an overproduction of fentanyl that is finding its way not just to the United States, but to Australia, to Europe, to Italy in particular. I was talking to colleagues this week in Italy on this file. And so there's a broader concern that this country has not, in terms of doubling down on issues such as financial crime, Canadian banks being leveraged by cartels. 3 Mexican cartels have now set up shop and are pretty entrenched in Canada. We have some 99 organized crime syndicates. That is a doubling in recent years of organized crime syndicates in Canada by the Canadian Security, by Canadian Criminal Intelligence Service, as reported. And so it's this proliferation of liabilities from Canada to the United States that the U.S. administration, both Democrats and Republicans, are concerned about.
The reason why I said it's a moving target at the beginning of our conversation is because last night, President Trump said there's nothing that the Canadians and Mexicans or Chinese could do at this point, that the tariffs were coming no matter what. So they seem more punitive rather than leverage to actually get something that he wants, because the Canadians are putting a lot of money, and they've done it much more quickly now, into border security. So I wonder what your interpretation is of these tariffs coming through, when initially it was a security concern, but he made it quite clear no matter how much we address the security concern at the border, he's not going to budge.
The Canadian plan is not a lot of money, $1.3 billion over 6 years, given that much of it is tied up in a parliament that currently doesn't even exist or can't even pass the supply bill that would be associated with this spending. The Americans understand full well that this is a quintessential Trudeau government announcement on which the government, it is very doubtful, has any intention of actually fully following through. Yes, it has taken sort of some tactical measures. We could have been much more strategic over the last 4 years and put those and ultimately put much more robust measures in place. I think what the Trump administration is trying to do is politicians respond to incentives, and ultimately they will go with inertia unless incentivized to change their actions. And the Trump administration isn't just looking for trinking on the margins by Canada. It is looking for a substantial U-turn on issues such as border security, national security more generally, defense spending, the various issues where there's deficits. And that is now manifesting and getting tied up in this broader sort of conversation about reshoring industrial capacity. And Canada ultimately had 4 years to prepare for another Trump administration. As I say, none of these concerns are new that Trump is expressing, and Canada felt for political reasons that ultimately it did not want to move on these files. Look, we have our own sovereignty, and we have our own elections in this country. We have our own government, and the Canadian government needs to make decisions that its own best interest. I do worry that the Canadian government's current approach is more tied up in anti-Americanism that might be good for the Liberal Party of Canada than in a national strategy that has the best interests of Canada in mind.
This is really fascinating, Christian, because so many of the experts in your field that we've spoken to have said, yes, of course, there is a problem with the flow of drugs and migrants and individuals, just illegal activity in this regard, but they haven't pressed on it to such a point as you have, that this is an ongoing issue, and regardless of who was in the White House and who was running the Senate or the Capitol, this is an ongoing issue for the Americans with us. So if the Canadians knew of this, if regardless of who was in Ottawa and in power, what is it that we needed to do? And what is it that we now need to do to ensure that this relationship does not further deteriorate?
Look, Canada's very lax visa policy has resulted literally in tens of thousands of people from India, for instance, showing up here irregularly. A substantial amount of them. It is now among the 5 most intercepted individuals on the border in terms of source countries. And that is directly attributable to the government's visa policy. The U.S. government, under both Trump and the Biden administration, tried to get the Trudeau government to rescind its visa policy with regards to Mexico. And the government took almost 8 years to do so. So you can see that there's a sense by the U.S. administrations on both sides of the aisle that the Canadian government is not listening when the U.S. government expresses significant concerns. And we had this after 9/11. And after 9/11, we sat down with our U.S. interlocutors. We spent 3 months negotiating, and we came up with the Smart Border Declaration. We subsequently had a longer negotiation under the Harper administration that resulted in the Beyond the Border Accord. So we have had constructive engagements, of course, the NAFTA renegotiation with the Americans, where we've taken their concerns. We've shown the Americans that we are listening to their concerns, we're taking them seriously, and we're trying to figure out where we can find mutual ground to mutual benefit. And it appears that that is not the strategy that the Trudeau administration is looking to take in this particular case. That it rather hoped that, I guess, Trump would not get elected. And now we all have to live with the ultimate consequences of a government that was unwilling and unable to prepare. I think that's both for ideological reasons within cabinet. There are members that simply do not want to invest in security, defense, and the like, and also within caucus because retail politicians would rather spend money on things such as healthcare and whatnot. It's just puzzling that the Trudeau administration, look, for years has been meddling in provincial jurisdiction. Think about childcare, think about school lunches, and at the same time now it is outsourcing border security and international trade to provincial premiers and to provincial taxpayers, which are clearly within federal constitutional, exclusive federal constitutional jurisdiction. So I'm not sure what's going on within federalism, but you can see that neither the premiers nor the Trump administration have confidence in the leadership that the current federal government is providing on this file.
Christian Leuprecht, always in education. Thank you so much for making time for us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.